Listen to a conversation between a student and a professor.
So, Professor Tibbets, your note said that you wanted to see me about my Hemingway paper. I have to say that grade wasn't what I was expecting. I thought I'd done a pretty good job.
Oh, you did. But do you really want to settle for pretty good when you can do something very good?
You think it can be very good?
Absolutely.
Would that mean I could get a better grade?
Oh, sorry. It's not for your grade. I think you could learn a lot by revising it.
You mean rewrite the whole thing? I'm really swamped. There's deadlines wherever I turn, and I don't really know how much time I could give it.
Well, it is a busy time with spring break coming up next week. It's your call, but I think that with a little extra effort, you can really turn this into a fine essay.
No, yeah. I mean, after I read your comments, I can see how it tries to do too much.
Yeah, it's just too ambitious for the scope of the assignment.
So I should cut out the historical part?
Yes, I would just stick to the topic. Anything unrelated to the use of nature imagery has no place in the paper. All that tangential material just distracts from the main argument.
I never know how much to include. You know, where to draw the line.
Tell me about it. All writers struggle with that one. But it's something you can learn that'll become more clear with practice. But I think if you just cut out
the stuff about the history. But if I cut out those sections, won't it be too short?
Well, better a short, well-structured paper than a long paper that's poorly structured and wanders off topic.
So all I have to do is delete those sections?
Well, not so fast. After you cut out those sections, you'll have to go back and revise the rest to see how it all fits together. And of course, you'll have to revise the introduction, too, to accurately describe what you do in the body of the paper. But that shouldn't be too difficult. Just remember to keep the discussion focused. Do you think you can get it to me by noon tomorrow?
Wow. I have so much, but I'll try.
Okay, good. Do try. But if you can't, we'll shoot for after spring break, okay?
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I never know how much to include. You know, where to draw the line.
Tell me about it.
What does the professor mean when she says this?
Tell me about it.
Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
As we learn more about the DNA in human cells and how it controls the growth and development of cells, then maybe we can explain a very important observation, that when we try to grow most human cells in a laboratory, they seem programmed to divide only a certain number of times before they die. Now, this differs with the type of cell. Some cells, like nerve cells, only divide 7 to 9 times in their total life. Others, like skin cells, will divide many, many more times. But finally the cells stop renewing themselves and they die. And in the cells of the human body itself, in the cells of every organ, of almost every type of tissue in the body, the same thing will happen eventually. Okay. You know that all of a person's genetic information is contained on very long pieces of DNA called chromosomes. 46 of them in a human cell. That's 23 pairs of these chromosomes of various lengths and sizes. Now, if you'll look at this rough drawing of one of them, one chromosome about to divide into 2, you'll see that it sort of looks like, well, actually it's much more complex than this, but it reminds us of a couple of springs linked together, 2 coiled up pieces of DNA. And if you stretch them out, you'll find they contain certain genes, certain sequences of DNA that help determine how the cells of the body will develop. When researchers looked really carefully at the DNA in chromosomes, though, they were amazed, we all were, to find that only a fraction of it, maybe 20 to 30%, converts into meaningful genetic information. It's incredible. At least it was to me. But if you took away all the DNA that codes for genes, you'd still have maybe 70% of the DNA left over. That's the so-called junk DNA, though the word junk is used sort of tongue-in-cheek. The assumption is that even if this DNA doesn't make up any of the genes, it must serve some other purpose. Anyway, If we examine the ends of these coils of DNA, we'll find a sequence of DNA at each end of every human chromosome called a telomere. Now, a telomere is a highly repetitious and genetically meaningless sequence of DNA, what we were calling junk DNA, but it does have an important purpose. It's sort of like the plastic tip on each end of a shoelace. It may not help you tie your shoe, but that little plastic tip keeps the rest of the shoelace, the shoe string, from unraveling into weak and useless threads. Well, the telomeres at the ends of chromosomes seem to do about the same thing, protect the genes, the genetically functional parts of the chromosome, from being damaged. Every time the chromosome divides, every time one cell divides into two, pieces of the ends of the chromosome, the telomeres, get broken off. So after each division, the telomeres get shorter, and one of the things that may happen after a while is that pieces of the genes themselves get broken off of the chromosomes. So the chromosome is now losing important genetic information and is no longer functional. But as long as the telomeres are a certain length, they keep this from happening. So it seems that by looking at the length of the telomeres on specific chromosomes, we can actually predict pretty much how long certain cells can successfully go on dividing. Now, there are some cells that just seem to keep on dividing regardless, which may not always be a good thing if it gets out of control. But when we analyze these cells chemically, we find something very interesting, a chemical in them, an enzyme called telomerase. As bits of the telomere break off from the end of the chromosome, this chemical, this telomerase, can rebuild it, can help reassemble the protective DNA, the telomere, that the chromosome has lost. Someday we may be able to take any cell and keep it alive, functioning and reproducing itself essentially forever through the use of telomerase. And in the future, we may have virtually immortal nerve cells and immortal skin cells or whatever, because this chemical, telomerase, can keep the telomeres on the ends of the chromosomes from getting any shorter.
Listen to part of a lecture in a business class.
Okay, as we've talked about, a key aspect of running a successful business is knowing, getting a good sense of what the customer actually wants and how they perceive your product. So with that in mind, I want to describe a very simple method of researching customer preference, and it's becoming increasingly common. It's called MBWA, which stands for Managing by Wandering Around. Now, MBWA, that's not the most technical sounding name you've ever heard, but it describes the process pretty accurately. Here's how it works. Basically, the idea is that business owners or business managers just go out and actually talk to their customers and learn more about how well the business is serving their needs, and try to see what the customer experiences. Because that's a great way to discover for yourself how your product is perceived, what its strengths and weaknesses are, how you can improve it, that sort of thing. Dalton's, they make soup and canned vegetables and such. Well, the head of the company had Dalton's top executives walk around supermarkets, asking shoppers what they thought of Dalton's soups, and he used that data to make changes to the company's product. I mean, when Dalton's, of all companies, embraces something as radical as MBWA, it really shows you how popular the theory has become. Yes, Lisa?
But isn't it dangerous to base decisions on information from a small sample of people? Isn't large-scale market research safer, getting data on a lot of people?
That's a good question. And, I don't want to pretend that MBWA is some sort of replacement for other methods of customer research. Now, market research data definitely can give you a good idea of the big picture, but MBWA is really useful at kind of filling in the blanks, getting a good on-the-ground sense of how your products are used and how people need to respond to them. And yes, the numbers of opinions you get is small, so you do need to be careful. But good business managers will tell you that the biggest fear they have and one of the most frequent problems they come across is, well, becoming out of touch with what their customers really want and need. Surveys and market research, stuff like that, they can only tell you so much about what the customers actually want in their day-to-day lives. Managing by wandering around, on the other hand, well, that gets you in there and gives you a good sense of what customers need. So when used in combination, then, MBWA and market research, well, they're powerful tools. Oh, here's another example for you. Senior executives for a clothing manufacturer, it was Elkin Jeans, They went and worked in a store for a few days, selling Elkin's clothes. Now that gave them a very different idea about their product. They saw how people responded to it. They could go up to customers in the store and ask them questions about it. Yes, Mike?
Well, I would think that a lot of customers would be bothered by, if I'm shopping, I don't know if I'd want some business representative coming up to me and asking me questions. It's like when I get phone calls at home from market researchers, I just hang up on them.
Well, it's certainly true that, no one likes getting calls at home from market researchers or people like that. But I'll tell you something. Most customers have the exact opposite reaction when it comes to MBWA. Now, don't ask me why, because I really have no idea. But the fact is that customers tend to respond really well to MBWA, which is the key reason for its success. In fact, the techniques of MBWA work so well, they've actually been extended to all kinds of different contexts, like politics, for instance. A few years back, the mayor of Baltimore, I think his name was Schaefer or something like that. Anyway, he decided that the best way to serve the people of his city, was to actually get out there in it and experience the things that they experienced. So he'd ride around the city and, in all parts of it. And he'd see all the potholes. He'd see how the trash was sometimes not picked up off the side of the street. And then he'd go back to his office and he'd write these memos. Now, they were memos to his staff about the problems he'd seen and how they needed to be fixed. That sort of thing. But the thing is, he got all this information just by going around and seeing the different Baltimore neighborhoods and talking to the people in them. Now, he called it smart politics. We'd call it MBWA, or just plain good customer service.
What does the professor imply when she says this?
When Dalton's, of all companies, embraces something as radical as MBWA, it really shows you how popular the theory has become.